And good evening. Oh, are we ready for the book of Judges? Okay, one person's excited. You know, I'm excited about the one. I'll take it. I'll take the one is better than zero. It's all right. Okay, let me pray, and we're going to need it, and we're going to dive into Judges. We'll be in chapter 9 today. We'll be in chapter 9. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, what a great honor it is to come here and study your word and to worship you. Lord, some of us were been out in the sun or we've just been working and we're tired, but I ask, Lord, that you help us to be focused, help our minds to be undistracted, that we might be able to study your word, reflect upon it, and be challenged by it to become more holy people as we leave here today. This we ask in your Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen. So a fun question to kind of start this off, and maybe you used to play these types of games when you were a kid, or maybe you just found these types of games absolutely foolish nonsense. But if you were to describe yourself as a tree, what tree would you pick and why? Okay. Okay, maybe you're just, I can already see it, just rolling your eyes like, are you kidding me? You know, so it's like for example, like if you were to ask yourself, you know, what type of tree, maybe you would say, you know what, over the past week, let's just talk about the past week, not your whole life, but the past week. Maybe you might say, you know, the past week I'm an oak tree. I feel like an oak tree, okay? I'm solid, I'm sturdy, it's been a good week. Okay, maybe that's how your week's been. Not mine. But maybe your week has been like that. Or maybe it's an almond tree because you're feeling a little nutty. Okay, so maybe an almond tree. Okay, or maybe an evergreen tree that no matter how cold it gets, no matter how much that wind blows, you're staying green. Okay, and you're just like, it's not easy being green, but you can do it. Okay, you can you can handle the winters and you can still keep your color. Okay, you don't lose your leaves, you don't lose your cool, you maintain and you go. Okay, or maybe you're a palm tree. Maybe you describe yourself as a palm tree, where you just say, you know what, my past week has been warm, it's been comfortable. I've just been kind of just lazing here, just providing some shade and just soaking up the sun. Okay, maybe that's been your week. Okay, or maybe you've been feeling like a cedar tree. I know that's not on the list. Where you're just kind of sticking up and the wind is kicking you and you're doing one of these and your hope is that you just don't break, but you don't plan on it. You're just going to run your roots deep, but you sway a little bit. It's just been one of those weeks. It's been rocking you back and forth, back and forth. You know, so like think to yourself, how would you describe yourself as a tree? Okay, and I know that seems weird, but that's what's going to happen in chapter 9. Okay, chapter 9 is going to present a parable, a fable, if you will, a story that is all about 4 types of trees. And that these trees, I know, when we're thinking about trees, we start thinking, you mean like the soil that got, like the seed that went on 4 different types of soil? No, that's New Testament. That's Jesus. Okay, we're talking about Old Testament, book of Judges, 4 trees. Very few people know this parable. Very few people have studied chapter 9 because chapter 9 of the book of Judges feels like it doesn't belong. Okay, it feels like it does not belong because everything about it is changing. Everything about it doesn't seem right. So the chapters before, the last judge we've been covering has been, nobody remembers the name of the judge? Gideon. Okay, it was all been about Gideon. Okay, and so chapter 6, chapter 7, chapter 8, 3 chapters. Gideon. Okay, and Gideon with his fleece, Gideon being a coward, Gideon not trusting, Gideon making a divining rod to make Israel prostitute themselves and turn from God and to be a snare, Gideon being a not very good judge. Okay, I know we got a group of people that, for whatever reason, love Gideon, and they make Bibles, and they put Gideon all over the Bibles. I think they should change the name. But that's just a personal opinion, okay? But nonetheless, I know some people just don't like change, especially a name. They just freak out for some reason. But nonetheless, we have Gideon. Okay, now, in chapter 9, Gideon is still present, but his name is not Gideon in chapter 9. It's Jerubbaal. Okay, so we don't get the name Gideon at all in chapter 9. For whatever reason, the author changes the name to Jerubbaal. Okay, so we get Jerubbaal or Jerubbaal, however you want to pronounce that, but Jerubbaal is how I like to deal with it. And so we got Jerubbaal, and that's Gideon, same person, okay? Because in chapter 8, we find out, if you were to back up just a little bit, and you were to go over to chapter 8, okay, you'll find out that you'll see at verse 31, it says that Gideon had how many sons? 70. And you thought your families were big. Okay, and he had 70 sons, his own offspring, no adoptions, no purchasing, okay, Bethany Christian Services not involved, okay, it's just none of that's happening, no children's home, okay, nothing's involved. It's his own offspring, okay. This is the dude who's been busy, right? This is a dude, okay, and they were all his own offspring since he had many wives. Okay, he had many wives. Okay, we don't know how many, he had many wives. Okay, it was almost a situation where the wives could like walk into the house and had to pick a number to find out where they stood to meet their hubby. Okay, it was kind of like, oh man, I'm number 23. I'm going to be here a while. Okay, he had many, many, many wives. All right, and I don't know how he handled that because it can be a challenge having one. But not me though. Mine's a blessing. Okay, but he has many, many wives. His concubine, so he also has like mistresses, slave women. Okay, he's trying to build his own little harem. Okay, so these are women that also are not his wives, but they are functioning as a wife. Okay, and so his concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he named him Abimelech. Okay, so this is how we know that this is who we're dealing with here, okay? Now in chapter 9, when you go into chapter 9, verse 1, what does it say? Abimelech, okay? And so, I even got the verses on my little screen here. Look at that. I really outdid myself. And so in chapter 9, verse 1, it starts off with Abimelech, son of Gideon. No, that name's not there. It's Jerubbaal. Okay, so chapter 9 tells us immediately that Jerubbaal is Gideon, just another name. Okay, in another language, another tongue, another name. All right, it's kind of like you have in the book of Esther, you have this woman, this young gal, her name is Hadassah, but she goes by Esther. Hadassah is her Hebrew name, and Esther is her Persian name, and that's kind of what we're dealing with here. So you have Gideon, and who is also Jerubbaal. Okay, so we got two different names for the same person, right? So to kind of keep that in mind. This makes chapter 9 weird, right? Because why do that? We just went chapter 6, Gideon, 7, Gideon, 8, Gideon, 9, Jerubbaal. Same author, same book, because. Okay, no explanation, no reference, no asterisk, no footnote, no hyperlink, nothing. Okay, just Jerubbaal. And we also have another big change in chapter 9. Never once in chapter 9 is the name of God used. Okay, when God is involved or God is mentioned in chapter 6, 7, and 8, in fact, really from the very beginning of chapter 1, you got Yahweh. Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahweh. You get to chapter 9, Elohim. Okay, and for the whole chapter, never once is there Yahweh, it's Elohim. Okay, so now we just get this generic name of God. Okay, just a generic God, the end. Okay, really kind of bizarre. And so it has led many scholars to conclude that chapter 9 does not belong in the book of Judges. It was not supposed to be included. It was an accidental addition. It was this idea that we have this book, and then someone was carrying it, and the wind took it, and it all scattered, and then another page from something else got landed on the ground, and he picked it all up, and chapter 9 kind of got shoved in there. Some have said that maybe this was a whole margin note that just kind of got added into the text. On and on, people have been trying to figure out why chapter 9 is there. Because chapter 9 does not act like the rest of the book. It doesn't mention a judge. It doesn't mention prophets. It's all about Canaanite history. It's all about violence. It is absolutely a gory scene. It's a disturbing scene. It has a fable from some random son. Nothing with it fits. You don't get Gideon, you don't got Yahweh, you got nothing. Okay, it seems like a commercial. Okay, it seems like a commercial. Like you're watching your favorite show, you're watching whatever it is, and you're just like, oh, man, this is a good show, this is a good episode. And all of a sudden, boom, have you washed your feet today? And you're just like, no, where's my show? And you're just like, commercial, come on. And it feels like chapter 9 is a commercial. And it just kind of goes, you know what? We're going to go over here for a while just because we can. That's what it feels like. That's what it seems like on the surface. However, chapter 9 is all about one particular son, Abimelech. It's all about him. Abimelech got introduced in what chapter? Chapter 8. Okay, which means then that since Abimelech got introduced in chapter 8, verse 31 and 32, when Gideon had 70 sons, and then he had this concubine that gave birth to a 71st son, and name was Abimelech, okay, and then Abimelech is going to be our main character of chapter 9 that shows us that chapter 9 was not an accident, chapter 9 is not an afterthought, chapter 9 is not a mistake, it is intentional what it is. It is intentionally written. It is the Word of God. It is breathed by the Spirit. It is exactly what it's supposed to be. It belongs. We do not have to change it. We do not have to erase Jeroboam and replace it with Gideon. We accept that the author did what he did on purpose. Okay, we don't have to worry about there being no judges. We don't have to worry about there being no Yahweh, just Elohim. We don't have to worry about that and get all frustrated with it. We can just say, you know what? The author did this intentionally because the author wants the grammar and the subject matter to strike the reader so hard that the reader doesn't miss that something's not right. The reader should read this and go, wow, something's off. Something's weird. This isn't right. And the reader and the author would go, yes, you're right. This isn't right. This is weird because something really bad is happening. And a lot of times the authors love for the grammar and the subject matter to be just as impacting of that message than just saying this is weird. Okay, they love to do that. That's how they wrote. That's how they did things. So chapter 9, on purpose. Chapter 9, appropriate, and it belongs. Okay, we do not have to make excuses for the Bible being weird. We do not have to make excuses for the Bible breaking rules. Okay, we don't have to make excuses. We can just accept that this is what God wanted and how He wanted it and move on. Doesn't that sound great? See, we just got to take the Bible at its own terms rather than trying to force it to fit in some type of literary box, which is what people keep doing, and it's frustrating. And this is why we get people saying, I can't believe the Bible because the Bible's full of errors and contradictions and problems and ambivalences and confusions. And you go, really, where's an error? And they go, I don't know where, it's in there somewhere. And then the ones that actually did some research, sometimes they'll point this out. Look at chapter 9, it doesn't belong. And I'm trying to educate people, and you guys especially, to know it does belong because the Bible is intentional. And if it doesn't make sense, it's okay. It means it wasn't supposed to make sense because what's happening in the history of the nation doesn't make sense because it's wicked at a different level. And what's going to happen with Abimelech is wicked on a different level. It is more, it's almost like we can say, here's Judges, and we know how it's going downhill, right? I've been saying this for weeks. It's going downhill, downhill, downhill. Have you ever noticed that sometimes on a hill, there's a spot that goes, okay? This is that moment where everything's going south and what's about to follow is just disaster for the rest of the book, okay? Rather than being this slow slope, it's just going to go drop off, okay? Because that's what happens sometimes. Have you ever noticed that happens in our country? That it's like, okay, things are getting immoral and moral and moral, then all of a sudden it just, and you go, how did we get here? How did this happen so fast? How is it that we are dealing with immorality at a level now that just 20 years ago wouldn't have even made sense, let alone 50, let alone 100, let alone 200 years ago. Like, we could track our nation's history and see a downward slope a little bit, morally speaking. But it seems like, doesn't it, in the last 20 years? Last 20 years. The last 7. Right? The last 7 have been an interesting, okay? Chapter 9 is the last 7 years of America. Okay, that's what it is. It's just this sudden dip, this sudden chasm, this sudden drop. Okay, almost as if God pulled his hand of restraint back and allowed people to run according to the lust of their flesh. Oh, by the way, that's promised to happen in Romans chapter 1. Where God gave people over to the lust of their flesh. It's where he pulls his hand of restraint back and says, you want to live like hell on earth? Live like hell on earth. And he pulls his hand back to where the point that people's wicked consciences don't even stop them from acting wicked. That even their conscience doesn't speak. Jiminy Cricket, dead. Okay, this is where we're at in chapter 9. This is what it feels like where we're at the moment in our nation's history. So hopefully we can see some parallels. And I want you to see the parallels here because what's about to be said in this parable, I think, speaks volumes to our nation. And the churches need to hear it and wake up. Okay, so hopefully I've got your curiosity piqued now as we get ready to dive into a chapter of the Bible that I guarantee you probably have not read. Most of you here have not read. Most online just have not read. If they've done the Bible in a year, they fly through it and they don't remember reading this chapter. Okay, it is not preached on. I have been in churches like for 40 plus years of my life, never heard this chapter preached. I've heard Judges as a study, this chapter conveniently skipped. Okay, because it is a complicated chapter. And some of the chapters that follow is going to make this chapter appear easy. So I consider this a time for us to cut our teeth a little bit. Okay, so moving on here then. So Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal, a.k.a. Gideon, okay, went to his mother's brothers at Shechem. Isn't that interesting that it's his mother's brother? Anyway, and spoke to them and to all his maternal grandfather's clan. And he says to them, he's got himself a strategy. Okay, Abimelech, he's clever. He's clever. He's shrewd. He's clever. He's smart. This guy has a head on his shoulders. Check out his plan. Check out his strategy. He says this, please speak in the presence of all the lords of Shechem. Okay, go to all the people, all the powers that be. Go to all the mayors, go to all the governors, go to all the satraps, go to everybody. Just go to everybody, okay? Go to the school board even. Go to the principals and superintendents. Go to everybody, okay? And talk to them and ask them this. Is it better for you that 70 men, all the sons of Jerubbaal, rule over you, or that one man rule over you? So would you rather have like a committee of kings, okay, and 70 kings rule over you, or would you rather one person rule over you? And guess who that one person is meant to be? Not someone else. He's not a commercial. It's him. This is Abimelech's strategy. He wants to be king. So is it better to have a committee of kings, because we all know that committees are more effective, because the bigger our government gets, the more efficient it becomes. After all, why just have like a handful of people in the Supreme Court? Let's pack it to 30 because that makes it more efficient. Let's have a bigger Congress. Let's have a bigger House. That'll make it more efficient. Yeah, we know that doesn't work. Apparently, that's been an issue for a long time. Okay, so we just haven't seemed to learn. Okay, so we'd rather have a committee or just one. Oh, and remember that I am your own flesh and blood. Is he their own flesh and blood? Half. He shares dada. He doesn't. He's a brother from another mother. Okay, and not just any mother, not even a wife, a concubine, which makes him the odd son out. Okay, he's like the closest to a son of an ill repute than the other ones. Okay, so he's a little bit of an odd son out. So he's like, would you rather have a committee or just one? Oh, and remember, I'm your own flesh and blood. Like, I got you, bro. I got you. Give me some skid because I'm part of y'all. Okay, we're all one big happy clan. right? Hey, I get to be the head of the table. I am the bloodline. This is kind of how this Abimelech is acting, okay? He's all that. His mother's relatives spoke all these words about him in the presence of all the lords of Shechem, and they were favorable to Abimelech. They're like, hey, he's right. That sounds good. I appreciate the initiative. He's thinking ahead. I like that. You're right. 70 would be a problem. One does seem to be better. If I had to pay taxes, I'd rather pay taxes to one person than to 70 people. Because if I'm paying taxes to 70 people, that seems a bit much. Because if they all are like, you give me 7%. 7% times 70 is going to be my paycheck. 7% to one person, let's do it. Right? Okay, so they're all like, yeah, that works. We're all favorable. That's great. And they said, after all, he's our brother. He's our bro. He's not going to do anything to us. It's going to be fine. This is going to be great. One of our family we're going to be relatives to the king. We get to stay in one of the extended suites at the White House. We're going to have this. Right? We get to be at the palace with the Prince George. We're going to have this, okay? We're going to be able to have we're going to have our own like security team following us around. We just got to make sure we stay in England and don't go to Canada or the U.S. But we're going to be able to have everything we need. And we've got this. We've got this. He's our brother. This is going to be great, being a relative to the king. Oh, this is amazing. So they gave him 70 pieces of silver from the temple of Baal-berith. Abimelech hired worthless and reckless men with his money. That's interesting. He hires worthless and reckless men with his money, and they followed him. He goes to any Tom, Dick, and Harry that just seems to have enough brains to put two pennies together, and that's it, and says, hey, will you follow me to show people that I have an army, I have a following, I have a kingdom, I have servants. He's making himself look wealthier than he is. He's making himself look bigger than he is. And he's got people that are going to do whatever he says because they're worthless. They don't have a brain on their head, and they don't have a head on their shoulders, and they have no morals about them, and they will do whatever he says, even if it's wicked, because they're just reckless people. And so he got them, and they followed him. He bought himself a kingdom. This is what he's doing. So he went to his father's house in Ophrah, and he what? Killed his 70 brothers. Okay? He killed the competition. He killed any chance of resistance. He went to his own flesh and blood and murdered each of them. He killed his 70 brothers, the son of Jerubbaal. Okay, remember, he's number 71 with a concubine. That was his mom. He goes to the legit family, and he kills every single one of them on top of a large stone. Notice the detail on that. Where did he kill them? On top of a large stone. That means he killed them one at a time. Okay, it's not like that he waited till they were all asleep in one big wing and put a stick of dynamite and C4 in there. It's not like he flew a big old bomber and dropped a bomb on the city. Okay, he went to a stone. It's almost as if he's saying, hey guys, let's play King of the Mountain. See if you can push me off the mountain. They came up the mountain. He goes, oh, by the way, I'm armed. And he killed them all one at a time. 70 brothers. Okay? The first serial killer of the Bible. Okay? This was not just a random act of emotional passion or anger or regret like with Cain and Abel. This was absolutely a degenerate serial killer, where he is targeting and picking out his brothers one at a time. And he kills one, has no remorse, no conscience, no regret, no sorrow, no shame, and lures another one, kills him, lures another one, kills him, lures another one, kills him. And does this day in, day out, until he's all that's standing. Are you noticing that this chapter is odd? It doesn't stand out, but it shows that something wicked is happening in Israel. They are going to a darker place than they have been, because this is going to be their ruler. This is going to be their king. Oh, by the way, as the ruler goes, so go the nation. One of the reasons why voting is so important. Because as the head is, so goes the body. Okay? And so that's what's going to be happening here. And so he kills his brothers one at a time. But, oh, this is a good but. Check this out. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jeroboam, youngest. Okay, we don't know how young, but he's the youngest. He survived because he hid himself. Okay, he has a little bit of Bruce Willis in himself. He went John McClane and got into the ductwork. Okay, he's hiding in the ductwork of the building, and he's playing possum. He's just hiding in there. However he hid. Covered himself up in mud and Arnold it inside of a beaver dam. I don't know. He hid himself. Okay, and he just is there, and he was able to escape the wrath. So he did not die. I guess technically that means then that 69 died. But Abimelech thought he got 70. Because, once you kill 50 people over a period of multiple days, you lose count. Okay, but one did manage to survive because he hid himself. Then all the lords of Shechem and of the Beth Millo gathered together and proceeded to make Abimelech king at the oak of the pillar in Shechem. So there's Abimelech. He's like, here I am. I am your king. You didn't want those 70 people. And you might wonder where they've been. Don't worry, they won't be a problem anymore. They're not going to try to usurp me. They're not going to try to overthrow me. They're not going to charge you 70 times taxes. They're not a problem. Okay? I went and I sent them on a long vacation. And they won't be back. Okay? And so then they said, yes, you will be our king, Abimelech. You will be our king. You know how to handle things and have initiative, and you know how to push the button. You can make it happen. This is who you are. And so they made him king. This was his strategy. This was his technique. This is how Israel gets a king at this point in the book of Judges. Notice that we're getting a lot of this kingship stuff happening, and this is well before we ever get to like David or Saul or any of that. Okay, so just notice what is happening within this area of the world. Hear the weirdness of this, the unusualness of this. So now we have Abimelech king, woohoo. And then we have a fly in the ointment. A little period of suspense. If this were to be a movie, it'd be like, oh man, what is ever going to happen about Abimelech? How is the nation ever going to survive? Oh, wait. Surprise. At the end of the credits, we find out there's still a bro left. There's still one guy left. And he shows up and he offers a parable. He offers a parable about 4 types of trees. Check this out. This is very, very interesting. So we're going to read these. Hopefully you got your Bibles open. Hopefully you got your apps fired up. This is Judges chapter 9, starting at verse 7, as we see this very fascinating parable said by Jotham, the youngest brother, the one who hid himself, the survivor. Okay, the John McClane of the Old Testament. That's who we're looking at here. So when they told Jotham, when he finds out what has happened, he climbed to the top of Mount Gerizim, raised his voice, and called out to them, listen to me, citizens of Shechem, and may God listen to you. And he tells this parable. The trees decided to anoint a king. Isn't that interesting? Okay, you just know this is going to cut, and it's going to cut deep. I give it to Jotham, man. He's willing to branch out about these trees. And he's trying to let Israel know that they were barking up the wrong tree here. Come on, these are good. Okay, the trees decided to anoint a king over themselves, and they said to the olive tree, reign over us, olive tree. But the olive tree said to them, should I stop giving my oil that people use to honor both God and men and rule over the trees? So here's what happens. So we get the olive tree. The olive tree is asked to be king. The olive tree says, no. No. He would rather be a servant than to be selfish. He would rather that his oil that he produces, his olive oil, be used to anoint other people than to anoint himself to be king. So he'd rather be a servant than to be served. Okay, that's what he would rather have happening here. So that's that tree. Then the tree said to the fig tree, because who doesn't like a good fig Newton? It's not the cookie after all, right? It's a fig Newton. You can have it in bed, and it's okay. Okay, so the tree said to the fig tree, come, reign over us, be our king. That's what they're asking. But the fig tree said to them, why? Why should I stop giving my sweetness and my good fruit and rule over the trees? So the fig tree rejects. The fig tree says, you know what? I would rather be productive and produce things than to waste my time being a ruler. That's the fig tree's response. Isn't that interesting? Hear the responses of these trees. I know the trees aren't really talking. I know it sounds Lord of the Ringsy. It sounds like a bunch of Ents walking around talking in slow Entish tongue. I know that, but it's a parable. It's a story. It's like when you say, two dogs walked into a bar, and the other one said, duck, and it's you expect that. It's okay. It's a fable. It's a parable. Okay. So the fig tree says, no, I'd rather be productive. I'd rather produce things like fruit than to waste my time doing something else like being a king. Okay, for the fig tree, the king was worthless. Verse 12. Later, the tree said to the grapevine, come and reign over us, O grapevine. Be our king, is what the grapevine is asking. But the grapevine said to them, should I stop giving my wine that cheers both God and man? I mean, yeah, hear that. Doesn't that sound great? So why should I stop giving my wine that cheers both God and man to rule over the trees? And so what the grapevine is saying is, you know what? I would rather benefit God. I would rather benefit people than to just try to benefit myself and rule. Okay, that's the grapevine's response. I would rather produce things that makes God happy. I'd rather produce things that makes people happy. I'd rather be like that than to try to make myself benefited, make myself happy, and rule over the trees. So the grapevine rejects the offer to be king. I'm just curious, who's willing to say that, yes, you've read this before, you know exactly where this is going and how this works? Nobody. How many of you are willing to say, I've never read this before in my life, this is totally new information? Really? Nobody? Wait. So you... This is bizarre. This is such a fascinating parable. Finally, verse 14. All the trees said to the what? Thorn bush. Some texts will say bramble. Same thing. Okay, to the thorn bush. Let me ask you, what benefit is a thorn bush? Nothing. Keep people out, but a thorn bush is not useful at all, is it? Okay, it's not useful at all. Is it a tree that you can get shade under? Is it a tree that you can get fruit from? Is it a tree that, no. Okay, thorn bush, useless. Okay, the only good things we find out of a thorn bush later is it becomes a crown for Christ during his crucifixion, and even that you wouldn't even say was a benefit. Okay, it's just, no. So finally, the tree said to the thorn bush, to the bramble, come, reign over us, be our king. The bramble said to the trees, if you really are anointing me as king over you, come and find refuge in my shade. Hear that. Can a thorn bush provide shade? No. The thorn bush is lying. The thorn bush is offering an empty promise. Of course, politicians today don't do that. Hear this parable, people. This is important. This is important where this is going to go. It is going to be surprising. Once we get the conclusion of this and we see what this is about, and I lay this out, it's going to be so meaningful. Come, find refuge in my shade. False promise, false promise. But if not, if you don't find me as good to be king, may fire come from my thorns or out of the thorn bush and consume the cedars of Lebanon. Can a thorn bush provide fire? No. A thorn bush can't even be put in a fire. Okay, I know this, right? Because I'm a pyromaniac. I love burning wood. Okay, I am a guy that loves a fire pit. In fact, tonight when services is done, I'm going over to the house. I got my fire pit ready, pile of wood on the side. I'm putting the wood in the fire pit, and I'm lighting me a fire, and I'm going to go, okay, I love me a fire. Right? And I know that there are certain types of wood that gives you a good fire. That's a good, big, thick piece of solid wood, right? But when you have like itty-bitty little twiggy branches or thorn bushes, and you get those long, slender sticks, and you get like dozens of them to make a big old pile, and you throw it on the fire, you know what it does to the fire? It burns for like a minute, and it's gone. Right? Those little small twigs, gone, right? You can't cook a hot dog on those. You can't even roast a marshmallow on those. All it gives you is soot. It doesn't even give you hot ash or hot coals or anything, right? It just gives you ash. That's it. It doesn't give you hot coal. It doesn't give you any type of heat. It doesn't give you anything to do anything useful for. A thorn bush is useless. It is not producing fire. It can't even properly catch on fire. All right? It is useless. So what we have is a thorn bush saying, I'll tell you what, come find shade with me, empty promise. Don't worry, I got your back. I'm going to curse those. I'm going to put fire upon those who don't recognize my kingship, which is an empty threat. Of course, politicians don't do that today either, do they? Hey, I'll tell you what, if China rises up, or if Russia rises up, or if South Korea or North Korea rises up, I'm going to be able to hold them back because I'm going to be your king. And then we find out that they did not do any of it. It happens all the time. And so Jotham gives his interpretation, just because he doesn't want people to miss the meaning. Real quickly, check this out. Now, if you have acted faithfully and honestly in making Abimelech king, have they? No. But he's like, you know what, guys? Here's my parable, and he tells it. And then he says, hey, you know what? If you have done well to my dad, if you've done well to him, and you've honored him, and you've respected him, and you've been good to his family, and you have rewarded him appropriately for what he did, verse 17, for my father fought for you, risked his life for you, rescued you from Midian, and now you have attacked my father's family today. You have killed his 70 sons on top of a large stone, and made Abimelech, the son of his slave woman, king over the citizen of Shechem, because he's a brother. So if you've acted faithfully, you hear the pain in Jotham's voice. Do you hear the sarcasm? He knows their guilt, and he lays it out. This is an Old Testament version of an old Turkish proverb. The old Turkish proverb goes like this: the forest was shrinking, but the trees kept voting for the axe. For the axe was clever and convinced the trees that because his handle was made of wood, he was one of them. Okay, this is his parable. That is the message here. This is what our nation keeps doing over and over again. This is what's going on. When we see mayors lose their position because they've been a bad mayor, and then suddenly they elect a new mayor of Chicago that was worse than the first one. And it's like, you didn't like the mayor because of these policies, and you went and elected another mayor that has those policies and more. Like, did you not learn? No, they keep voting for the axe, thinking that he's one of them because he's clever. This is happening all over our country. It's happening all over the place. And what we find is that this parable, oddly enough, is extraordinarily anti-politics. And it's anti-kingship. Very fascinating. Check out the conclusions that it gives. Here's the message of the parable. Let me break it down from all the trees and all the interpretation afterwards and all that follows. Let me just break this down for you in just a few simple steps here on what's happening. So here's what this passage is teaching about politics and how Jotham is viewing it here in the book of Judges chapter 9. First, he says that politics and getting involved in in politics in general and running for office or anything like that tends to become self-destructive. In the end, you're going to ruin yourself. Okay, the wise ones know not to do it. And those that still go for it, they tend to find themselves in a self-destructive point. They find that people who run for politics ultimately are unproductive and unhelpful. They make all these policies, but it's the farmers and workers that really make the country run. All these people got these laws and these policies and that policies, but in the end, it is the workers that are being productive and helpful. Notice that's how the trees responded. I'd rather be productive and benefiting people than being a ruler. That's how the trees were responding. And that's how this passage is laying it out. And that ultimately, those involved in politics end up ultimately being destructive to the people they're very much trying to protect. That the people say, I want to vote for this person, I want to vote for this person. That person gets elected, and then they find themselves burned. They find themselves going, ugh, I was hoping for something different. And they find themselves hurt by the person they voted for. Of course, our nation hasn't dealt with that at all, has it? They haven't unanimously voted for someone, or in a sense, a majority vote voted for someone just to have the nation go to the toilet. See, this is a parable that is like warning people, letting people know this is what to expect. And that the parable says this, that those who are constructive have no time for politics because they're just too busy being constructive. So they don't got time to go to this meeting and that gala and this dinner and that dinner and trying to do this political connection and that networking. They're just too busy making things, developing things. I hear people say they go to big, successful business people, and they're like, why doesn't this person run? Why doesn't that person run? And they're like, I don't want to run for office. I'm too busy running my company. Because they're too busy being productive to try to be a national leader or a city leader. It's interesting. Very interesting. Okay? It continues onward. Point number 5, that the rule tends to fall on the despicable. Have you ever noticed that we never find the best people getting in office? We tend to find people that in the end, they are people of moral problems, severe moral problem. Even the people who would say, hey, that's a moral person. And then we find out, man, they have a lot of affairs. They've been with porn stars and they're doing this and that. And we find out that they're more immoral than we ever thought. And then we try to make excuses for it, right? We say, well, that's just the culture back then. They're just from an old era where that's just how they were, as if somehow that makes it okay. And so we just find that a lot of times, those who get into power tend to be despicable people. That's what the parable is trying to point out. And that the people that desire power, desire it out of self-interest. You tend to find that those who would be really good leaders or really good at politics are the ones that don't want it and don't run for it. And they don't desire it. That's not their goal. That's not their ambition. But the ones that do want it, and if they don't get it, they just thirst for it. And they try again and again, and they're just hungry for it. They want power. They're in it for self-interest. They're not trying to serve, they're trying to be served. That's what the parable is trying to warn. And that people who get involved in politics, they have to offer empty promises in order to get elected. So they got to say things in order to get people to be on their side. Even if they know they can't achieve it, they'll say it anyways because otherwise they're not going to get the vote. And so they offer empty promises, and they offer empty curses, and they offer empty statements because they don't know how else to get people to vote for them and to accept them and to anoint them as leader. And so they say whatever in order to get the job. And then in the end, Last point there on this, the people get what they deserve. The people voted for an axe, they get an axe. They voted for the blade, they get the blade. They vote for the thorn bush, they get the thorn bush. They get what they deserve. That's the parable's warning. And that's what Jotham ends up saying. He's like, you know what? If you treated my dad fine, then great. You treated my dad fine. But if you didn't treat him fine, then may the cursing come upon you. You get what you deserve. May Abimelech destroy you. May he bring fire of curse down upon you. Which we'll see next week is what happens. Spoiler alert. But I don't want to end on just this dark side of things. Because that's how this part of the passage ends. It ends on a very bummer of a note. I would like to offer a little bit of hope, if that's all right. Just for a moment. That we have to keep in mind that though what this is talking about tends to be the norm, we need to realize that the norm is never 100%. Just because it's normal that the worthless and despicable are the ones that get into power, that is not always the case. There have been and will be good rulers. There has been and will be good rulers. Israel has had some bad kings, and they've had some good ones. They've had some people that are described as leading Israel astray and prostituting them to other gods. And there are some that have created a revival in the land, and that the people worship the Lord, and the Lord blessed the nation, and that there was a godly king that was raised up and led Israel to great triumph and great prosperity and great wholeness, and was able to unite the nation under the one God that is the Alpha and Omega, that we've seen that. And we'll be seeing that as we continue digging our way through the Old Testament. So we need to just realize that the norm is not 100%. So just because we look and we say, man, it seems like all lawyers are bad. It seems like all politicians are just liars. Just know that it's not 100%. It's not 100%. Sometimes the godly are elected. Sometimes there are good people that end up in positions of power. And that's amazing when it happens. And they lead well, and they rule well, and they're not selfish about it, and they're very much a servant, and they help, and they guide, and they're great with organizing, and they have great administrative skills. It's great when that happens. We just need to remind ourselves. Good rulers do exist. Good rulers do exist. I've seen it where Christians will many times not involve themselves in voting positions because they say, what difference does one vote make? What difference does my election make? Because if I vote, just some cracker pot is going to end up into the office anyway, so I might as well just stay home and let the nation go to hell in a handbasket or in a hay basket and just call it whatever. And they don't remember this, that good rulers do exist, and they won't even have a chance of getting into power if the church doesn't stand up and voice itself. And so we can't let the words of Jotham be the only words. They are important words. We need to hear those words. But they are not the only verses in the Bible. There's a little book in the New Testament called Romans that seems to indicate that God's in control. That no matter what happens, God's got this. And even if the person who you voted for doesn't get into that position, it is okay. You don't have to throw up your hands and say, I give up, I quit, because no election happens that surprises God. No election has a result that frustrates God. Because He knows what's coming on, He knows what's going to happen, and it's already been accounted for in His plan. He is not surprised by it. He is not frustrated by it. It does not slow him down. It does not usurp any of his plans. It does not invalidate at all his will. It happens what happens, and God still is in control. No election results are outside of God's control. And we got to remember that that's the other side of this picture. Eventually, when Israel started trying to organize themselves, and they wanted a king like all the rest of the nations, they end up with Saul. Bad king. But who is in charge of the process? God. We need to remember that. We need to remember the hand of God. And we cannot despair and give up and just let people do whatever. We must continue to voice the hand of God. That is the message and passion of the church. We need to be Jothams. We don't need to be stuck on just the parable. But notice, he stood up. And then he went, after he got done with his parable and gave the interpretation, he ran away and hid again. Smart guy. Because sometimes people don't like the words of somebody speaking the truth. And they will blast you online, they'll blast you to your face, and they'll blast you wherever, and they will insult you and belittle you and come after you, and that will happen. So sometimes you just kind of got to do this, here's the truth, I'm out of here. And it's all right. But here's what he did. He stood up and he voiced the truth. He did not give up and say, let the people do whatever. I'm just going to hide in my house and close the blinds. He did not cower. He saved his life so that he could speak, and he went on top of a mountaintop and yelled for all to hear his voice with boldness, with courage, with cleverness, and told the story of truth so that the people would hear it. Oh, church. Are we going to be that type of voice? It seems like over the past many years, the church has been way too silent. And we need to remember we have a voice, and it's time to exercise it. Let's have a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, Lord, it is such an honor and privilege that you have allowed us to live during these times. Lord, it's not an accident that our parents were who they were. It's not an accident that our grandparents were who they were. That you brought them from whatever land, from whatever state, from whatever region, and you brought them together in such a way that they would have their kids who would have us, that we would be born when we were, how we were, so that we would be here today. Brought here by you, O Lord. You have called us to be alive during this time and have entrusted us to handle the issues of today. Lord, help us to have courage from that. Help us to have boldness from that. Help us to have confidence. Lord, that we are not just a stick in a river accidentally bouncing along, Lord, but that you have chosen for us to be here at this day, at this time, to deal with this culture. Help us to be your voice. Help us to be your hands and your feet. Help us not to cower. And this we ask in your Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen. And you guys are dismissed.